listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the place to learn about new technology and technological advances before they become mainstream. This podcast is sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. It's not about the destination. It's about going someplace you never thought possible. Go to imaginenext.ingrammicro.com to find out more. Let's get into it.
Welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. I'm your host, Keri Roberts, and my guests today are Doug Logsdon, a business development manager, and Jason Crandall, a staff solutions engineer from VMware. Welcome, gentlemen. So excited to have you here today.
Hey, Keri. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So business continuity is always top of mind for partners, and organizations are expected to meet higher spikes in traffic without sacrificing the delivery of goods and services. Scale on demand is what you suggest is the answer here, but what does that mean and why does it matter?
Sure, I'll answer that one first. When we start talking to IT companies, one of the big challenges that we have is they have to pre-plan and pre-allocate what they're going to have for resources so that they're available when they need them. And what this means is, purchasing equipment, having it racked and stacked and configured, and then potentially having it sit idle for a portion of the year. And I mean, these are capital expenditures that just kind of sit there and begin to depreciate over time. When we start looking at what, scale on demand can bring, this opens the door, especially when we talk about like seasonal bursting, the ability to add those hosts as you need them and run them for a matter of hours, not have to rack and stack them and then depreciate them over years. And so being able to have scale on demand can dramatically change what the CapEx and OpEx model looks like for IT.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I was just reading the other day a great example of a company that at the end of the day really hadn't planned for the shift that they've experienced over the last few months into more of an on-demand type environment because of some changes in the overall environment across the industry. And they're really struggling to complete orders, to execute on orders, and in short, deliver a positive customer experience. You contrast that to what Jason talked about having a company that can really scale on demand as needed, and it really presents a different outcome for that customer experience.
Now, why are so many using VMware Cloud on AWS, and why does it work so well with AWS?
Well, VMware Cloud and AWS was VMware's first foray into working with hyperscalers. Prior to this, we'd been in the private data center and we had worked with our VCPP partners to offer, their colo services in a multi-tenant environment, but we had never really worked with the hyperscalers, Azure, Google, Oracle, AWS, Alibaba, all of those. VMware Cloud and AWS was our first joint venture. We spent multiple years collaborating with AWS, with their engineering division, to help bring this into fruition. And it's more than just, you can run VMware and it's near your AWS workload. This is running native inside AWS's global infrastructure. And on top of that, because of this engineering effort, we have hooks that hook directly into those AWS native workloads. And what this means is for developers, they can continue to develop on the AWS side of the fence if they desire, but now we have brought the VMware enterprise workload closer to that workload so that we don't have latency between the two. And this really opened the door for the idea of scale on demand, where we're able to use these hyperscalers resources, and you could have a need all of a sudden. We really have to have these 5 hosts in London for this workload we're working on. Traditionally, that would have been a huge undertaking to try to find the staffing, the colo, the availability to try to stand up physical equipment. And now with VMC on AWS, 2 hours later, you could have an SDDC up and running. You could be in the vCenter. It fundamentally changes how IT works, and it fundamentally changes one of the biggest challenges the developers had when working with their core infrastructure team, and that was, I need resources and I need them now, and the core infrastructure team being like, well, submit this ticket, we'll have additional resources in a couple weeks. That's what led to shadow IT. So this transformation is what's helped reining that back in and allowing these sysadmins to secure and harden their environment and not end up with the security risk that was shadow IT.
Yeah, and the great part about it is, as Jason talked about, that years of co-engineering, the partnership we have with AWS, it's really taken the best of both worlds and delivering a VMware SDDC running on AWS bare metal. But when I talk to customers, the great part about it is it literally just looks like another endpoint in their data center. It leverages all the same training that they have today, the same tool sets, the operational processes. Those are all already in place. And so being able to leverage VMware Cloud and AWS brings that hybrid cloud solution to the forefront and delivers the agility of a hyperscaler solution for our customers.
Now, can you share with us some use cases or maybe examples of how scaling on demand could work and also has worked with some of your clients?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I have a customer, or had a customer in a previous role here at VMware, and truly a seasonal customer. I mean, they did over 90% of their business in 2 weeks out of the year. And they built, because of the processes they had in place, they built their data center to that peak. And then they added 25%. I mean, just some buffer just in case. And the reason they added that 25% was it really took about 90 days for them to identify a capacity need within their data center, and through the procurement process and the shipping and racking and stacking and all that took place, took them about 90 days to get that capacity implemented on the floor. So the other thing that was happening at the same time, they were needing to have a large outlay of CapEx for some new servers. So instead of making that CapEx purchase, they decided to leverage VMware Cloud and AWS. And first to start that process was to move in their development and test environment into VMware Cloud and AWS. That deferred that CapEx expense. But then over time, as they went into that seasonal season, they had that baseline experience already in VMware Cloud and AWS. And so they were able to burst appropriately from that seasonality. So they really didn't ever have to then architect their data center moving forward to that peak. They were able to scale on demand as needed and then scale back down as needed during that peak period. And as I talked about earlier, doing so in a manner where it just looked like another endpoint in their data center. So from an operational standpoint, it was exactly the same that they'd been using before.
Yeah, I've seen similar. When we talk about scale on demand, it really comes down to having bursting needs. Running big test dev environments, we see it a lot with developers where they're getting ready to do a general release of a product. They need to do heavy testing. They're going to scale up and do significant testing, and then they're going to scale back down afterwards. I also have firsthand experience dealing with the main number that is used for flower delivery. And they have 2 times of the year that they have dramatic spike of need for people that can answer the phones. And so they have large VDI workloads that they scale up just for Mother's Day. Mother's Day and Valentine's Day, this company really needed to scale up. So they built their infrastructure just for those 2 days, where they had thousands of remote workers that they would bring online just to help answer and take all these calls. And then the rest of the year, this infrastructure sat static. They did this for years and years until we brought about the ability to scale on demand. That fundamentally changed how they operate their business.
Yeah, and lastly, I'll give you another one. In short, retailers are a prime use case for this seasonality. You think of Black Friday, you think of just the retail season, as a whole. But I worked with a customer, and one of their peaks was actually on Christmas Day, Christmas morning, right? And the reason is because their product, once you unwrap that present, their product required an activation. And I can't think of anything worse than you get a brand new present, or you give your son or daughter a brand new present. They go to activate it and start playing with it, and you can't, because of one reason or another from an infrastructure perspective. So they were able to scale on demand, right, for that very intense peak period that is obviously very important for their customer satisfaction and their customer experience.
When should a company decide if they should be doing scaling on demand? I mean, should it be something where they should always be planning it from day one, or is it based on kind of the data they're seeing over time? Like, how do you know when is the right time to be thinking about this?
Well, at first, I would say there's always advantages to knowing what resources you're going to need. With VMware Cloud and AWS, we have on demand, which is billed hourly, and then we have a 1 and 3 year reservation. So, one of the most important things is trying to identify what's my static workload, what do I know that I'm going to need on a continual basis, and does it make sense to do a 1 or 3 year reservation and save significantly and then be able to burst on demand? It tends to be a pretty organic thing. It really comes down to how many hosts do I need on demand, how often do I need these throughout the year, how many months out of the year, and where is that balance where it makes sense to do a reservation and just have them all the time versus burning them on demand. Really, I would say it comes down to what Doug and I just described. When you have those bursting needs, is definitely one of the main ones. Doug, do you have anything else?
Well, and it goes back into the overall architecture planning, and you think about one of the main reasons to move into a hyperscaler environment, in the first place, is that agility, right? And be able to be more nimble than, in the customer example I brought earlier, that 90 days needed to look forward and be able to implement new infrastructure. So being able to plan appropriately is key, but being able to react to the needs of the business. So as I work with my customers over the years, they look the IT team looks at the rest of the business units within their enterprise as their customers, right? So they want to be able to meet and serve their customer needs. VMware Cloud and AWS gives them the ability to do that, gives the agility needed, but doing so in a way that they can still provide the governance and the IT leadership that they need to do that in a secure manner.
Now, what are some of the challenges of adopting public cloud environments that are different from an on-premises investment?
I would say, first of all, when we talk about VMware Cloud and AWS, this is vSphere, vCenter, vSAN, NSX, all the same components and tools that they're familiar with operating and securing in their on-prem environment. One of the fundamental changes, though, is that this is an infrastructure as a service offering in which VMware is the root admin. VMware does all the patching and maintenance and monitoring. Now, that's a huge advantage. That means that from an IT admin perspective, you can focus on the operational efficiencies that drive increased revenue for the company and produce good business outcomes, and you're not focused on patching and monitoring, which is less, again, more operational. So there's an advantage there, but one of the drawbacks to that is VMware being the root admin, that means you have less control of the environment than what you had when you run it on-prem. Inherently, when you move to any kind of a SaaS platform, you're kind of giving up a little bit of control because they're going to operate all that on the back end. Now, what that can mean for challenges is not all third-party products are going to work inside VMware Cloud and AWS. If it needs to have root admin credentials, if it needs to, install a custom VIM onto that host, those sorts of things aren't going to be available because we are working in a, mass hyperscaler global environment, and we can't do customized deployments like that. So I would say that's probably one of the bigger challenges. Doug, what do you have as far as challenge?
Yeah, if you think through that, it shouldn't be underestimated. We've worked with customers, Jason and I have, that talk about, hey, we're going to work on VMware Cloud and AWS as an interim solution before we re-platform and refactor our application into some type of native environment. And the interesting part about this, as we've done this for a few years now, because of how VMware Cloud and AWS works, they never either have the need to complete that refactoring or re-platforming process, or maybe it just doesn't work in the first place, and we've had both. And so we can't underestimate, the time and the cost it takes to refactor and re-platform these applications, because it is material to the overall project on what they're trying to do to get to the cloud. The other thing that we found with customers, absolutely, especially the ones that are VMware customers that have, their infrastructure and their teams and the training based around VMware technology on-prem, you move into a public cloud environment, there's different operational tool sets, there's different processes, you have to think about retraining staff and time being able to do that. And probably one of the biggest things is, once in a public cloud environment, and you've gone through the costs and expense of that replatform and refactoring, as we've talked about, what if at some point in the future, unforeseen at this point in time, there's a need to move those workloads either back on-prem or maybe into another public cloud environment? That is difficult as well and needs to be considered as part of the planning process.
Those are all excellent points. I agree completely. One additional thing too is that on your idea that say customers say, "Oh, I'm going to bring this to VMC on AWS as a landing spot, and then we're going to refactor." A lot of them think that they're going to do this because they inherently think I'm paying an additional cost because I'm using VMware's hypervisor and technology inside the public cloud versus native cloud. And that's really not the case. When we look at what we can do, when you look at a native hyperscaler and you want to move a VM in, traditionally you are buying a set size VM, a certain amount of CPU, a certain amount of RAM and storage. When we look at VMware Cloud and AWS, we're dealing with entire hosts at a time, similar to what we run on-prem. And this host means that you have complete control over your limits and reservations. So if you have that workload and you know that you can overcommit CPU and maybe you can overcommit RAM, you have the ability to fully utilize these hosts, which can be far more cost efficient when we're fully utilizing the host versus putting them in individual VMs. Now, the trade-off there is we really need to have enough VMs to populate an entire host. If you have 15 VMs you need to move in, then we need to look at a multi-tenant construct like Cloud Director Service to carve up that SDDC, or else the cost efficiencies aren't there, and it does look like something that you would want to put into like native EC2.
Now, would you say that there are any other benefits that we haven't talked about of cloud scalability that most partners might not know about yet?
In my opinion, one of the biggest ones is this gives those admins the ability to get the resources to their developers in the time that they want it. The whole reason that Shadow IT came to be is because a developer would need resources. They would, go to their IT staff and hear that it was going to take, days or weeks to get availability for that. And that was a challenge. On top of that, their automation constructs, when they're running Ansible or whatever they're running to try to stand things up, they need to be able to substantiate that, and they don't care what the backend infrastructure is. They just want their resources. And when we start looking at what we can do with VMware Cloud and AWS, we can rein that back in, allow those admins to maintain control of their environment, know that it's a secured and hardened environment. And then again, the developers, they don't care what it's landing on, they just want their resources. So I would say that's a huge advantage when we start looking at what we can do with scalability and on-demand scaling with VMC on AWS.
Yeah, and if you think about it from a partner perspective, there are some inherent benefits around the solution as well. For example, the partner is able to deploy globally in any of the AWS locations around the world where we have VMware Cloud and AWS offered, but they can bill that in US dollars. So they're truly able to provide a global reach and then bill that in US dollars. We have, through our MSP partners, we have monthly payment options. So Jason talked about on-demand solutions, 1-year reservations, and 3-year reservations. Those 1-year and 3-year reservations via our MSP partners can now be delivered via a monthly payment option. We're also able, and it's just rolled out, and we're very excited about it, through some of our MSP partners, we're also able to, with the launch of Cloud Director Service, VMware Cloud Director Service, we're also able to offer multi-tenant solutions within VMware Cloud and AWS. And inherently in the architecture itself, we talked about the agility and the scalability, but the ability to inject a host as needed without any application downtime, being able to support their customers appropriately, it really brings a level of sophistication to their offering, allowing them to expand geographically as needed, where maybe they didn't have that opportunity before.
And not just geographically. Let's say you've got a partner and they have the opportunity to take on a much larger customer than they traditionally have. And maybe there's inherently a huge risk there if this customer needs, say, 50 hosts. If they bring that infrastructure in and that customer were to not stick around long term, that can be a major challenge. All of a sudden, they have this huge CapEx investment that's just depreciating. And with VMC on AWS, that can help alleviate some of that risk for a partner, where they could bring in that customer, bring them in on 50 hosts on a 1-year commit. And, let's say the customer decides, we want to bring it back in house. Well, now that partner doesn't have that asset that is depreciating. So it really alleviates a lot of risk that could potentially put a partner in the red. This gives them the opportunity to try to take on those larger opportunities, which inherently can make that partner grow, which is obviously what every partner is looking for, is to continue to expand.
Yeah, great point.
I mean, every time we talk on this show, I am just amazed at, between Ingram Micro and the partners that they have, like yourselves, just how many options you offer. There really is something for everyone. You can kind of adjust it, as you're saying. There's monthly payments. Now we have things on demand. It's really great to see the technology industry adjusting to what partners and organizations need. VMware enables enterprises to take advantage of a seamless and accessible infrastructure from data center to cloud. Can you tell us a little bit more about how it does that?
Sure. One of the core tools that's included with VMware Cloud and AWS is HCX, or Hybrid Cloud Extension. Hybrid Cloud Extension is a very cool technology that VMware has been developing over the last 5 years. What this does, this allows us to deploy a fleet of appliances on both sides, takes a couple VApps that we deploy on each side. And once we've deployed these appliances, it allows us to do a layer 2 stretch, so we can stretch their IP segment from on-prem into the cloud. This means that we can begin vMotioning the VMs over. And HCX includes a vMotion component with compression and dedupe built into the appliances. So not only can we vMotion things, but now we don't have that same latency sensitivity that we would traditionally have when doing a vCenter to vCenter migration. And on top of that, HCX also includes bulk migration capabilities. So we can schedule and have 100 VMs all synced up into the cloud, and then have a scheduled cutover period when we either succinctly vMotion each one of those, or we do a big cutover. But this allows us to move VMs up into VMware Cloud and AWS and back home without having to re-IP or without even having to power off the VMs. This fundamentally transforms the whole idea of moving into a hyperscaler, because traditionally when customers are looking at moving into AWS, it's a big deal. To Doug's point earlier, you have to make sure that you have the operational expertise in-house to secure and harden that environment. You fundamentally change how your security constructs work. You fundamentally change how your applications work. And if the winds of IT change and you decide, I need to bring that workload back home, I don't want it in a hyperscaler anymore, that becomes a significant challenge, as significant as it was to get in there in the first place. With VMware Cloud and AWS, we're still working on the same hypervisor, and we have these native tools that allow you to live migrate that workload. So it alleviates a significant amount of the risk that's involved when you're making such a huge decision as, do I want to run this in my own data center or in my partner's colo, or do I want to run this on in the hyperscaler?
Yeah, and just to take that from a little different perspective, the migration in and of itself that Jason talked about, but then, how do you maintain and operate that, from a day two perspective? We talked earlier about, in a traditional hyperscaler, the time and cost from replatforming and refactoring. The great news about VMware Cloud and AWS, you don't have to do any of that, right? You can just migrate the workloads as Jason talked about, and as needed, you can migrate those workloads back without any replatform and refactoring. But when they are up there, VMware, you've heard probably before around our hybrid cloud offerings. This is truly a hybrid cloud offering. And it gives the customer the ability, or the partner the ability, to manage it holistically with either their colo environment or with their on-prem data center environment, or both. And to give you an example of that and how easy and seamless that is, one of my customers that I've had previously, they were looking at two different solutions. One solution granted, a traditional hyperscaler solution, and they did not have the expertise around that solution, right, in-house, but they needed to stand up this POC for that. It literally took them a couple of months to do that for all types of reasons, but part of that is they just really didn't have the expertise or skill set and tool set to be able to do that appropriately in-house, and so it took them a great length of time to do that. That same test, right? That same test to take a look at on VMware Cloud and AWS, it was stood up and producing test results in less than 48 hours. So the ease of use to do this and then to manage it as a truly hybrid cloud environment is a great benefit for VMware Cloud and AWS.
Now, if someone wants to try VMware Cloud on AWS, they can do so in the Getting Started Hands-On Lab. Can you talk about how people can access that and what they can experiment with when trying it out?
Sure. So our main portal for hands-on labs is where you'll find VMware Cloud and AWS. On top of that, you can go to cloud.vmware.com. And when you go to VMware Cloud and AWS there, you'll see that there is the ability for a hands-on lab. This walks you through all of the components that you haven't seen before. The creation of that SDDC, the software-defined data center, and using the cloud services portal, which is a new construct that isn't in the on-prem version of vSphere. And what that walks you through is what it looks like to create the SDDC. It's really only 5 steps. You're choosing what type of host type you want to deploy, what region you want to deploy it into, and then you hook onto an AWS account that you already have. When we hook on the AWS account, we are connecting into a VPC or virtual private cloud inside AWS. That's the only thing that needs to be created on this whole AWS side of things when we're standing this up, is the customer needs to have an AWS account and they need to have a VPC created. Both of those things are free. Once that's done and we create that SDDC, we create hooks into that VPC. And these are called in AWS terminology, an ENI or Elastic Network Interface. And what that is showing is it's showing the construct of how we hook the VMware Cloud SDDC into the native AWS VPC and what all of that looks like. After that, it's literally vCenter access. So things are extremely similar to what you've seen on-prem. So the Handson lab walks you through the whole front end section that you've never seen before.
Yeah, and just to echo that, I would highly recommend, if people haven't had access to the VMware Cloud and AWS environment, take advantage of that, right? We've talked about the ease of use and the ability to be able to spin those SDDCs up in a very efficient and timely manner. You can actually get experience doing that with the Handson lab, and there's no cost, and so it's a great tool to move through the process.
It's great to be able to test something out and get a feel for it beforehand. So I love that you all have that. The one question we ask all of our guests on this show is, where do you see technology going within the next year?
Personally, I continue to see a big drive towards SaaS. I think most of applications we're going to see are going to continue to move into a software as a service. And I think all of us traditionally were a little apprehensive about this. We've traditionally gotten used to going into Best Buy or going on to Ingram Micro and purchasing whatever that license is that we need for business, and we purchase a license and we're good to go. And maybe that's going to last us for 3 years, and there's going to be the occasional updates or security vulnerability update from that software vendor, and that's that. When we move into a SaaS world, and we do this with our own apps on our phones, right? I think we've all purchased that app for $5 that we thought was great, and then the app just kind of sat and stagnated. When we move into a SaaS world, it kind of puts skin in the game for both sides. From a consumer perspective, we are paying on a continual basis. It's a perpetual license, and that's traditionally what we're against. But then we start looking at what it means for the developer. The developer starts to see a continual stream of revenue, which drives them to continually update and improve the application. And if they don't, you're going to stop subscribing. And that fundamentally transforms how software operates. And we start to see, and we're already seeing it even with VMware Cloud and AWS, rather than have an annual or biannual release cycle, we are now on a quarterly release cycle with intermittent pushes during that quarter. I mean, it totally transforms how software works, and it falls in line with the new agile models of development. And I think that the two go hand in hand, and ultimately we're going to see the majority of applications move into a SaaS type of delivery system.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. The migration to SaaS-based services is going to continue to accelerate. We've seen the evolution of that over the past couple of years, and I only see that accelerating, not only within VMware, but just in general. I mean, the model's proven, and it's really become more mainstream. As you see businesses, in today's environment, reevaluate their corporate real estate needs and their data center needs. You think about on-demand, scalability, data center extension, and even data center replacement. All these use cases come to mind that allow companies the agility needed to respond to today's rapidly changing landscape and keep them focused on their core business of really delighting their customers.
Now, both of you have provided so much insight and knowledge and a lot of detail today. If people have questions or they want to connect with either of you, where can they do that? Where's the best place?
Yeah, probably the best place. Jason mentioned earlier, we have a tremendous amount of resources on cloud.vmware.com/VMC-AWS. It's amazing, and I literally go to that site on a daily basis. Use cases are out there, roadmap information out there, pricing examples, calculators are out there, frequently asked questions, solution briefs, white papers, you name it, it's probably on that site. However, if you need additional information around either the solution or just how to get started, obviously you can reach out to your VMware sales representative, and or from a partner perspective, reach out to your partner business manager or business development manager, and they can bring in the right resource to get started.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much for being here and sharing your insight today. And we look forward to hearing more from both of you again soon.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Keri.
If you like this episode or have a question, join the discussion on Twitter at Ingram TechSol with the hashtag B2B Tech Talk. Thank you for tuning in and subscribing to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro.
You've been listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, hosted by Keri Roberts. This episode was sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. B2B Tech Talk is a joint production with Sweetfish Media and Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro production handled by Laura Burton and Christine Fan. To not miss an episode, subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform.